Ah, oh, we missed a lot. Oh,
Yeah, I think I was asleep this
yeah.
afternoon.
Oh,
So
well.
sorry. That's okay.
Well, anyway, now we're at the point of talking about the subject. Um,
That's a
and
good place to start, isn't it?
yes, I talked about the problems before. Let me just flip through the slides. These are a series of slides we talked about first. And we're at this immense problem that we have with our growth interfering with the entire planet and our not knowing what to do and acting as if caught in the headlights. Nobody knows to steer the system and doesn't seem to have investigated how to steer the system. So anyway, how nature does it is how we do it at home. We start things small and build them up, and then we fill them out with details, and then we coordinate it with how it's going to apply. Making dinner is like that. We start developing something, then we adjust it and refine it, and then add finishing touches. And of course, without the finishing touches, it's really not dinner. So that sequence of things starting with a rough design and then a smoother and then a perfected design, such as a graduation for our schooling, when we're ready to go off on our own, that follows that same cycle of ABC. Um, and you see that, well, in hurricanes as well, although they don't have our intentions, and trees, which don't have our intentions either, nor snowflakes, nor cities. And of course, in the lives of all people, we start exploding from germination in the womb with no intentions whatsoever. And then when the design is at some level of preliminary perfection, of the design is formed, then we're born and we start learning about the world. So we switch from an internal perspective entirely to an external perspective largely. And then when we enter the world for stage C, engagement or fulfillment of the life, it can last quite a while and be very, very engaging. So the question is, how do those things happen? Well, I've been going on about it. This is a diagram that shows it, narrates it in a little more detail, which may not be needed at this point, but each of the change points, the germination, the handover of the resources to the maturation or the preparation, and then the handover of the resources to the engagement or fulfillment in the environment. That's the key, is that each of these stages takes the resources from the impetus or process before, and then carries it a distance and then passes the resources on for the other direction of development. Now, this is positive feedback, negative feedback, and then balanced feedback as the third stage. Not exactly homeostasis. In life, you go on all sorts of explorations. You don't constantly seek a center. Engagement's different from homeostasis. But it's that passing of the resources from one to the next that is part of the transition. And so how do we do that? Well, in making friends, making dinner, or doing office projects, or writing a research paper, or any other kind of project that takes creativity, we do it by reading the context of the work for the timing and shaping of each transition. So with the germination, we look at it and say, well, God, that's a wonderful idea, but I can't do that. And it snuffs out right away. Or or that says, well, let me see how this goes. And if it grows and grows and gets to a point where you see an opportunity to perfect it before it gets into trouble with, like if you're making dinner and never paid attention to what was the point to perfect it, you just get all the cans off the shelf and all the food out of the fridge and then have a mess. You have to perfect something. So we do that with making friends. Something clicks and then has a kind of of a high point of finding this, of discovering the new friendship, and then once it becomes clear that this is something that needs to last or shouldn't, then you make the decision about which way to go, to whether going off of A onto B to make it last, or to drop. And with office projects, it's the same thing. You know, you take an idea, or nature instigates some new, I want to say people from some new culture come into the office, and all of a sudden something starts working in a new way. You nurture it along, and then make a decision as to what to do with it. If it's if it's a lasting thing or just a flash in the pan. But so how do we break our attachment to endless growth? You know, that's the question, and what do we do with it? You know, if we're attached to growth stage A, which is having the world economy as the generator and the pile of power, which is the concentrator, taking the profit from the economy into the pile, and then taking the money from the pile to invest in expanding the economy, and then taking the expanding profit and adding it to the pile, and so forth, a endless positive feedback loop that's now destroying the planet. This has been going on. Of course, it's ancient times when rulers used power to grow power and struggled to keep it growing. We've been doing the same thing every time we have a major financial crisis in the last 400 years. We found something to fix, and we fixed it, and it grew a little further, and it collapsed, and we fixed it, and again and again. And the Greeks actually made a major contribution. They combined what I mentioned, the Hestian culture's strong focus on family life, that's still very much a root of our own family life culture, with powerful new science. So with strong family culture, really strong family culture, and this brilliant new science, the growth curve could last longer. But it overwhelmed Greece and caused Alexander the Great to take the wealth and go off to Iraq and Iran, and never come back. And then the Romans took over, and they extended it too. And today's Euro-American marvel has vastly improved the science and vastly improved our ability to extend the multiplication of power that has been the focus of the control culture, and exactly what caused that fixation is maybe another thing, but we can see that we're fixated on it, and we're also, well, we're starting to become aware that it's destroying the earth for future habitation, and that's not good at all. and we haven't seen why. So we're in a real terrible fix. Now, a trim tab is that little rudder on the rudder, the big rudders that you can't turn by brute force, but need to capture some of the energy of the stream you're trying to turn in. That's the trim tab. Might start moving economic resources, might start moving some of this stuff over to the labeled freedom, which is the resources needed to care for the system that we built. So first you build something, then you care for it. That's standard procedure with everything that people do that they have any steering control over. We don't have control over the economy, and it's not using its resources to care for what it built. So that's what the natural growth option would be, is for the resources that have been going into the power pile to, instead of destroying the earth and the economy, pushing it to its limits of real collapse, it would go to caring for it. And the expert managers of the system, interestingly, are among the most well-educated and successful professionals. They're also mostly great moms and dads relying on profit growth to secure their homes and families, but unaware of the escalating threat to them caused by their own work. And there are the activist organizations looking for environmental and systems solutions, which they don't understand, but they feel what's happening intensely, and they're great communicators who deeply care about the earth and society. Neither one of them realizes they really need the other. One with the know-how and the survival instinct, and the other with the passion and caring for life on Earth. And so how to get the know-how and the know-why together? Could it be the trim tab that would move the system as a whole towards safety? Well, I think it could be. I don't know. We steer growth systems all the time, of all kinds, and we could study them, and we could convince highly educated people who are focused on their survival, if we could get them in a private conversation, perhaps not away from work. I don't know, but the part of the problem is that systems are mostly steered from the inside, not outside. And science has talked about mostly steering systems from the outside and not aware of the inside. So we have all kinds of barriers, but we need some extra leverage to get us through and start the process going. I think once it gets kick-started, like the deer in the headlights, once they start steering, they are out of there in a jiff, but they're stuck. It was actually my brother in Massachusetts. He was a CFO for a big abrasives company, and he had an inside view of what the executives are like, and he's the one who told me that how intensely focused they were on protecting their families. And it was my work as an architect that showed me the 3 stages of system design, and it was my curiosity about solar design that showed me how air currents did it as well. Just like, obviously going through a different set of system transformations than I did at my drawing board, but clearly doing the same transformations, the positive feedback, negative feedback, engagement, neutral feedback. And it was a retired professor whose important work on the history of family life showed me how to decode the deceits of revisionist histories. Pat Thompson, um, who pointed me to discovering more about the pre-Greek home life culture that stabilized the scientific process for multiplying the destruction of the earth and until we're really almost there. Anyway, so that's the talk. I have a whole bunch of more slides, but I think we're at 1:38. We have 20 minutes for discussion. Nobody's brought up too much yet. Anything plausible here?
Could you back up to the curve?
Which curve?
That one right there.
Yeah.
So I'm a great fan of patterns, cycles, to the extent that I have sort of studied it being presented by numerous authors. And isn't there another half to this where if you simply fold the left half over the right half so that it declines in the same way?
Right,
So
and reverse the arrows, and you have that's the general pattern of the life cycle, and that systems have life cycles is part of the same discovery, that they grow and decline.
Right. So the thing that Adizes talks about in his life cycles is that somewhere in the B part of this curve, you actually evolve to another level above C, so that you continue in what he calls a prime state, that you continue to evolve.
Okay.
And
Well,
our difficulty seems to be that the way that we evolve is based upon growth as opposed to development. I have this favorite saying about cemeteries grow every year, but they never develop.
right. Do you have any example?
They're all around us.
Well, well, in gestation in the womb, of course, we go through from one system to the next rather furiously and come up with a unified design. And if that's what you're talking about, and I say yes, we most certainly go through multiple stages of system development. But I don't think without some kind some kind of a further study, we can extrapolate other curves. You need to have examples, and in this case, also the other thing that I forgot is quite important is that this is an idealized curve. It's not a historical curve. Historical curves have bumps all over them, and they go through the same cycle, but there's continuity because a design needs to have continuity. You can't have discontinuities in a design process. It falls apart. So there's a connection through the curves, but I think that what you may see is a well, there's the example of education. We go through 12 years of growth to climax progressions in knowledge, or 20 years, depending on the person. Each year you go through a cycle and you have a leap and a leap and a leap. And
though the cycle that you're currently talking about in education is the understanding of the world around us continues to evolve, and typically people's education does not keep pace with that, so that there's actually a decline in the extent of their understanding of the world around them, to the point where in the future, some point they actually die and pass away. But the other, you ask about an example, if you read John Glubb's The Fate of Empires, he talks about 3,000 years worth of various empires that succeeded one another in essentially the same life cycle, from birth to growth to reach their peak or their pinnacle and then decline over time.
Right. Well, there's Joe Tater's view, which I think is pretty sophisticated, that um, following a growth preoccupation, a maximum power principle type of society, like we've inherited, that you get to a point where complexity is its own defeat. It's the only solution left, and it disables the society. And as you can see, the complexity of our society is heading in that direction, where it's too congested to change anything, and it's harder and harder to fix things. So the complications of the natural world is what I'm saying need to be considered. The curve is not a formula. It's a question mark, is asking, how do you get from A to B? Well, you've got to accelerate and decelerate somehow to have continuity. There's physics in that, the continuity part, that you can't change, you can't move without energy continuity, and so speeding up and slowing down.
So Jesse, are we
Yeah.
just trapped in a big tragedy of the commons? So that if I don't pursue the same game that everybody else is playing, then they will continue to play it and I will lose.
Well, that's a lose-lose approach. I'm trying to look at a way of tapping into our intelligence, rather than accept our blindness. And I see the blindness, and I think it comes from interpreting our rules for how to control things as being nature. And
Have you followed any of the work of Schmachtenberger
no,
about searching for the third attractor? I mean, he goes through
third
endless series.
attractor. I don't think there's a phase space. I don't think there's a phase space.
Okay, well, he goes through multiple examples of multipolar traps in terms of how to approach some way of guiding society off of this course that we seem to be on toward annihilation.
Well, I would you put it in the chat?
Yep, will do.
That'd be great. I'd like to. From reading it, I can probably intuit what examples he's talking about, but.
And then the work of Peter Zion and his book about the world. The end of the world is just the beginning.
Well, yes, we've done that several times. We've had we formed great civilizations and killed them, maybe 100 times. I think we're at a point where nature's sort of fed up with us, giving us the tools to destroy the planet. And I when I say that, what keeps running through my head, of course, is the context of things I'm thinking about and that I'm not saying. And one of those is exhausting the mineral wealth of the earth to the point where after collapsing a technological society, we would not be able to rebuild it because it would be too inaccessible, too expensive. And we'd be resource poor to begin with, rather than resource rich to begin with. And you could have another human society. I don't think it would be possible to exterminate all of humanity. People are too gamey and imaginative and adaptive. People will survive. It's just that what we built, it doesn't seem like the thing we should throw away.
Anyone else like to chime in here? You have mesmerized everyone, Jesse.
What about the idea that we mistook our concepts for nature, our tools, mistaking our tools for being the world that we live in, and sort of losing sight of things?
Maybe I have first a brief question. You said about this curve, you said there is no mathematical formula behind.
Well, it's an exploratory process that natural systems take, that we do. You can see it in our work, in animals, and in plants, and in storms. But development is an exploratory process in nature.
Yeah. Okay. Now, because you're sort of blinded me then a moment, because when I see S curves, I always think in the mathematics of Verhulst,
Right.
or logistic curve with the natural log, etc. For me, an S curve without a formula is, everywhere in nature it has this mathematical dynamic. So that is why it might look a little bit different to your S curve than what I see as logistic or growth curves.
Well, there are those.
Let me think for a moment.
Right. Yeah, the basic difference is that I used my model, which is similar to logistic curve, to ask questions about the complexities of the world, rather than the other way around. And one of them, of course, is the beginning of the distinct transition between one phase and the next that you see in nature. The transition from A to B for animals is birth, for crying out loud. It's the most dramatic upset of the system ever. Throwing it from a completely internal focus to an almost completely external focus. So.
Now, the only thing I agree with Gene, that the only thing that surprises me is the C part of your scheme, because when I look at nature from the early start on to today, it is almost I don't think it's possible to see anything in nature that is not growing. I think everything in nature must grow. There's something that must grow. But at the same time, we never see something surviving forever. There is this principle, and everything goes with these growth curves. And it seems to me that the death of the curve is already sort of built in at the start. It's like a double whammy. You get this balance between structure and dynamic, get more and more structure. That kills the stuff, makes it unstable, like any complex system cannot stand too much feedback control. And then you start a new S curve. And it is that C phase of yours is, for me, and I'd also like to have a reflection from Gene on that, if you like. For me, the C is basically just another S curve.
Well, in my view, it represents the period of maturity during which a system is slowly declining physically, but growing experientially. You know, like in our lives, we have all sorts of growth phases after we graduate from school and go off on our own, but our bodies don't get any bigger. Well, they may swell and shrink a little, but
let's not go there, Jesse.
okay, but we have the same bones, we have the same system. The system doesn't grow. Its health varies during the period of maturity, which is you know, it does have a finite end and begins to you know, you begin to disengage and de-emerge and finally you know, become exhausted.
Yeah,
in-
that's what I mean.
so
That's
it-
what I mean after
Yeah.
sort of this in the last inflection point of the S curve.
right.
That's sort of halfway B. There,
Right.
the system is only going in a positive feedback downward, not upward. You need to mature another S curve protected by the first one if it is going well. Like
Well,
mother.
I don't know.
You need to have a sort of sequence of constant S curves. And in the S curves, smaller S curves, and in the smaller S curves, like Russian dolls, smaller ones. It is just one big.
Yeah, every day is an S curve.
Yeah, it's like.
You can't put those all on a general diagram, though.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
So
So,
that's
you know,
why I'm a bit surprised by C. I cannot see
that's
here
life.
that.
That's
Okay.
the life of an organism is C. That's its life. Its growth is getting up to life.
So the real intent
Let's
ought
do
to
that.
be to figure out how to extend C before it begins to turn downward
Yeah.
toward death and non-existence,
Well,
as opposed to having the decline begin right after B.
well, I don't think it's. I guess you have to get beyond A before you can worry about C.
Yeah.
I agree. I don't know about C, but I think Jesse might be focusing more on B. Are you saying that to get from one constant state to another constant state, you
Right.
have to speed up and then slow down?
Right. Well,
It
not
seems like
just
that's the
slow
part
down.
you're focused on here.
Well, if you take in a life history, you have 9 months in the womb, and then you have 20 years before you graduate from and gain independence for a human life. That's a ratio of, say, 25 times. So the growth of our civilization so far has been, say, 400 years. 25 times that is 10,000 years. So our maturity might take 10,000 years if we have the same proportions of compound growth, formation, and then preparation for the future. Phase B might be 10,000 years.
A problem with omitting the decline after C
Oh,
is
well,
that in
I'm
order
not
to
omitting it. I'm not omitting it. I'm
what
just
is on the curve.
you know, I first studied that and then realized that it was too complicated a subject for most discussions. You know, I think that you know, decline does happen for any system, that there's no infinite system in duration. But I'm not worried about that. I'm worried about getting beyond A. And we're not, as a society, as a world society, we're committed to never getting beyond it. That's, you know, and multiplying the complexity of what we do with the scale
So Jesse, what do you see as the transition between A and B?
Oh, I see that as the educated management community that actually knows how the economy works, understanding that they need to change to using the resources for caring for the system rather than just growing the system till it fails.
Though
That it's
when one,
something that's in-
Oh, yeah.
though when one
Yeah.
looks at the diagram, C looks like stagnation.
Well, that's what I should have mentioned, and I already mentioned once that this is for signaling for as a set of questions about what's happening in the background. That as far as the feedbacks go, you have a speeding up, a slowing down, and something of a continuity, and actually mathematically there's continuity everywhere, but yeah, no, C is not stagnation, but how do you draw a curve? Should I make it wiggles? I don't know. To me, life is a very eventful engagement with ups and downs that are both thrilling and frightening, and then but you eventually get to a point where you disengage and decline, and then in the same way that the beginning is inspiration, the ending is expiration.
Yeah. Maybe you said at your first inflection point there between A and B, that's where people start to become wise and understanding it.
Well, I'm saying that for society, that's the point where we need to become wise and understand.
Oh, yeah, we need to become. Yeah, I react a little bit on Brian's chat actually, because besides being a psychiatrist, neurologist, I'm teaching boardrooms for the last 40 years, and in strategy, and you know, S-curve is one of the great tools in strategy of organizations. It is flawless. But at my experience, what I teach at the university and in my consulting work, is that the phase between A and B, just that middle of the curve, is about the most, a bit opposite of what you're saying. And that's why you need to be wise there, is about the phase where the big sleep starts. That is where things are going so well. And suddenly people think that the growth is a consequence of their own actions. By the way, it's a consequence of the system. And they get spoiled by their perverse incentives and end up in sort of mega profits in the midst of B, in the harvest phase, but get asleep almost to a criminal level. And then I always say, you are wise, if I may finish, you are wise about until the middle of the S-curve. So you need to start transforming to a next one, just at where you have written that red arrow at the end of A. That's where you start to transform already. Accept the fact that you will go in more efficiency and more structure and profit, but efficiency is the last word before bureaucracy, and then you decline. So I completely agree, Jesse, with your wisdom you need, but I think in the blue arrow, I only see, and that is based on 40s of practice, even with when Fiorina, I worked in the team for Fiorina when she took over Compaq. I have not done small jobs actually in my life, but that is the phase where people are, as you say, still have that sort of clear vision, clear view, and that is where they should start to change already. So that's my to a next curve that gives you sort of in the dynamic your phase C of constant keeping alive and managing that. But this is sort of my comment, also reacting on Brian, actually.
Well, I guess the thing I guess I'm not hearing back is what I have in my own thinking thought of as central is the form of growth during A and B. And during A, it's multiplying a pattern from the past, and in B, it's coordinating and perfecting a pattern for the future. So there's a feed forward
Typically in fulfillment lies the seeds of decline, because we're no longer going someplace. So once you have arrived, what's the intent? It's to just continue to be comfortable. So I have a problem with